Hi, I'm Dan Balzer with Keystone Learning Systems. Welcome to our installation tape for the new Windows 98 operating system. On this video, we'll show you how to perform a standalone installation of Windows 98. We'll also take a look at some pre-installation issues you should consider. We'll also take a look at installing Windows 98 and deploying it out amongst many machines over the network. As always, we have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. First up, we're going to take a look at performing a Windows 98 installation on a standalone personal computer. We'll take a look at the hardware and software requirements for Windows 98. Then we'll take a look at the different command line options that are available using the Setup.exe installation program for Windows 98. We'll see how we can perform an upgrade from a Windows 95 computer. We'll also take a look at performing an upgrade from a Windows 3.x computer, and then we'll go ahead and perform the full upgrade going from MS-DOS. After that, we'll take a look at safe recovery during the setup, where if something happens to your computer while it's installing Windows 98, safe recovery should allow you to pick up where you left off. And finally, to finish the section, we'll see how we can go ahead and successfully log on to Windows 98, showing us that we've performed the installation properly. The minimum requirements for Windows 98, according to Microsoft, are as follows. A personal computer with an Intel-compatible CPU, which is at least a 486DX 66 MHz processor or higher, at least 16 megabytes of memory, also known as RAM, a minimum of 150 megabytes of available hard disk space, and this is necessary because Windows 98, when it performs the setup, it goes ahead and it needs space for temporary files. You also need to have a mouse or some other type of pointing device, and you need a VGA or better display adapter and monitor. Some recommendations, some actual real-world recommendations for installing Windows 98 would be an Intel-compatible CPU that's a Pentium or higher compatible processor. So Pentium, Pentium Pro, Pentium 2, or better. And at least 32 megabytes of memory instead of 16. You'll find you'll be able to work with Windows 98 much better if it has 32 megabytes of RAM or more. The more RAM, the better, the faster your system will run. Also, you really should have a CD-ROM drive. Trying to install Windows 98 from diskette, although it's possible, takes a very long time. It's very tedious. It's a lot faster and a lot more fun to use a CD-ROM. So you have a CD-ROM drive in your machine, and most machines sold today do come with that. You're also going to want to have a tape backup device so you can back up all of your important files after you've been working with Windows 98. Windows 98 supports a wide variety of tape backup devices. Of course, you need the 150 megabytes of hard disk space, but you're probably going to want to have a lot more than that available on your computer if you're going to be running a lot of applications like the Microsoft Office and other applications as well. Of course, you need the mouse again or other pointing device and a VGA or better display adapter and monitor. Now that we've seen the hardware requirements and the recommendations for Windows 98, let's take a look at the different command line options for using the setup program. If you plan to upgrade your computer from Windows 95 over to Windows 98, what happens is if you have auto run enabled on your Windows 95 machine, which is the default, when you insert the CD-ROM for Windows 98 into your machine, auto run will go ahead and start, and this is what you'll see. You'll see the Windows 98 CD-ROM message box telling you that the CD-ROM contains a newer version of Windows than the one you are presently using. And it asks you if you'd like to go ahead and upgrade to Windows 98 right now. If we clicked yes, we could go ahead and begin the installation process. However, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you some of the different command line options for the setup program, so we're going to say no for the moment. And we can see here's our opening screen for the Windows 98 CD-ROM with auto run enabled. There are different things you can do, such as take a look at the interactive CD sampler, take a look at some cool video clips showing off some of the new multimedia capabilities of Windows 98. We can browse the different files that are located on this CD, and we can also go ahead and set up or remove different Windows 98 components if we already had Windows 98 installed. What I'm going to do for the moment is come down to my Start menu here in Windows 95, and I'll select Run. From the Run box, I'm going to click on Browse. I'm going to go ahead and browse the Windows 98 CD-ROM. I'm going to click my Look In drop-down, select my CD-ROM drive, which on my computer happens to be drive E. And here we can see the different folders that are available here on the Windows 98 CD-ROM. There's a folder called Win98, and I'll go ahead and double-click this folder to open it up. And here we can see all the different files and folders inside of the Win98 folder here in our Windows 98 CD. I'm going to select the setup.exe file. This is the installation program for Windows 98. And once I've selected that file, I'll go ahead and click the Open button. So now we have a full command line on this computer. It's /win98 /setup.exe to run the setup program for Windows 98. If you want to see all of the different command line options that are available through setup.exe, what you need to do is put in a space at the end of the line, type a /, and then type in a question mark. And now we'll go ahead and we'll be able to see the different command line options that are available to us. We'll click OK to run setup with the / parameter, and we'll get a window that pops up showing us the different options that are available. We can see the syntax of how you can run setup with the different options here on the command line. If you're responsible for managing different computers, you may very well be interested in these different command line options. This lets you control the installation process for Windows 98. Let's see what some of these options are. One of the command line options for setup for Windows 98 is called Batch. Here you can specify the name and location of the file that contains the different setup options. This is if you're doing if you're rolling out or deploying multiple machines in a larger environment. There's a /t option, which can specify the name of a temporary directory. Windows 98, when it's installing, needs a location for storing temporary files. And if this directory doesn't exist, it will be created during the setup process. As a cautionary note, any existing files in the directory will be deleted when Windows 98 is installing. There's a /im switch. What this does, this will skip the memory check. If you're having problems installing Windows 98 on a particular computer, you might want to try the /im, and that might solve your problems. You might be able to perform the install. Another switch is /id. What this does, this tells the setup program to ignore the disk space check. So if you know that you have enough disk space available to install Windows 98, but for some reason the setup program isn't cooperating, you could use a /id switch. Another switch for the command line for the setup program is /is. This will skip the routine system check. And again, if you're having problems installing Windows 98, you might want to use this parameter. Although don't use it lightly, be sure you know what you're doing before you go ahead and skip the routine system check. It could lead to a situation where you have an unstable installation of Windows 98. So be careful when you're using these different parameters. Another command line option is /iq, and this will skip the check for cross-linked files when Windows 98 setup initially starts. The /ie parameter, what this does, this will not create an emergency boot disk. This is usually for an installation that is run unattended. Ordinarily, you always want to go ahead and create an emergency boot disk. The /ih parameter will skip the registry check, and again, I don't recommend this. It's only in specific situations where you're having problems installing Windows 98, where you might want to use this particular option. And finally, the /iv switch will skip the display of billboards during the setup of Windows 98. Once you're done looking at these different command line options for the Windows 98 setup program, simply click OK and you're returned to your Windows 98 desktop. So now let's see how we can actually launch the setup program to upgrade a Windows 95 machine over to Windows 98. What I'm going to do now is close down the Windows 98 CD-ROM window by coming to the upper right-hand corner and clicking on the X, and return to my Windows 95 desktop. You want to be sure that you've fully backed up your system before you perform an upgrade to Windows 98, because you are changing your operating system and you never know what could possibly happen. So be sure you're fully backed up before you start. The other thing is, notice on my taskbar I have no application programs running. You want to be sure no programs are running when you perform the upgrade. Now I'll click Start, and I'll go up to Run, and I'll go ahead. Notice I already have a path, a command line opening up here for my setup program for Windows 98. So I'll go ahead and leave off the /?. I'm not going to run this with any parameters. I'm simply going to accept all the defaults, and I'll run the setup program. So with setup.exe here on the command line of my run box, I'll simply click OK to launch the setup program, and we get the opening dialog saying welcome to Windows 98 setup. And we can go ahead and simply continue from here. What I'm going to do now, though, I'm going to click Exit. We're going to show you how to perform an upgrade on Windows 3.1. Microsoft has worked very hard to make the upgrade process transparent, whether you're upgrading from Windows 95, Windows 3.x, or even MS-DOS to go over to Windows 98. Let's see how easy it is to perform an upgrade from a Windows 3.x machine. We're here at a Windows 3.x computer looking at Program Manager, and we have our main program group open. Once again, you want to be sure that you have no application programs running when you perform the upgrade. And in Windows 3.x, what you can do is press Control-Escape on your keyboard to bring up the task list. And notice that the only task currently running is Program Manager. So you want to be sure there are no other tasks running. I'll go ahead and I'll close it down to return to Program Manager. The other thing is, again, be sure you're fully backed up. You never know what can happen when you're upgrading your operating system. What we can do now is come up to the File menu, select Run from Program Manager, and we'll click Browse to take a look at the Windows 98 CD-ROM. I'll select, it's my D drive here on this computer, I'll select the Windows 98 CD-ROM. And from here we can see all the different folders that are available on the CD. And I like to, even though there is a setup.exe file on the root of the CD, I like to actually go into the Win98 folder by double-clicking and then select setup.exe. And once I've selected setup.exe, I'll click OK from the Browse dialog. Click, you can see the whole command line filled in for us. Click OK for Run. And again, the Windows 98 setup program will be off and running. What you would normally do here is, again, click Continue, and you'd continue with the installation process. The last type of installation we're going to show you is the upgrade from MS-DOS. A lot of people out there are still running MS-DOS, but now they want to go ahead and upgrade. Perhaps they've upgraded their hardware. They want to run the latest operating system, Windows 98. Let's see how we can go ahead and install Windows 98 on an MS-DOS system. We're here at an MS-DOS computer. Fortunately, we've upgraded the hardware so it meets at least the minimum requirements to run Windows 98. I'm looking at my CD-ROM drive, which is drive D on this computer. We can see all of the folders and files that are on the CD-ROM for Windows 98. I'm going to change directory over to the Win98 directory, type CD space Win98, and hit my Enter key. If I do a dir, we can see all the different files and folders here on my Win98 folder on the Win98 CD. If I do a dir star.exe, we can see the executables that are in this folder, one of which is called setup.exe. And I can see the different command line options that are available to me, even from MS-DOS. If I type setup space /? and hit enter, it won't run setup. It'll simply show me the different command line parameters that are available to me. The other thing you want to make sure that you're running if you're going to perform an installation from MS-DOS is make sure that you have Smart Drive loaded. Smart Drive will make the whole process a lot faster because it performs disk caching, and it'll make the file transfer process a lot speedier. So now that we've seen the different command line options here in MS-DOS, we can run the installation program by typing setup and hitting our Enter key. And it shows us that setup is initializing. To continue, press Enter. To quit, press Escape. I'll press the Enter key to run ScanDisk. ScanDisk will go out and it'll examine our hard drive and make sure that our hard drive is in good working order so that we can go ahead and install Windows 98. Once ScanDisk completes its process, and if it doesn't find any errors, it continues on, and you'll see a new opening screen for the Windows 98 setup program. Even from MS-DOS, the setup program is completely graphical. Let's take a look. So here we can see setup is preparing the Windows 98 setup wizard, which will guide us through the rest of the setup process. If you're upgrading from Windows 3.x or Windows 95, You will not see as many questions as you will if you're performing a full installation, if you're installing, for example, from MS-DOS, which we're doing right here. So we'll get a lot more prompts than we would if we were simply upgrading. And here we get the Windows 98 Setup Wizard license agreement. We have to accept the license agreement to continue. So we'll come down and click on the I accept the agreement radio button, and then we'll click Next to move on. From here, we need to enter in our product key, and we can see that now with Windows 98, Microsoft has gone to a different convention where we're using letters as well as numbers for the product key. Type in your product key, and then go ahead and click Next. And here we can go ahead and select the directory where we'd like to install Windows 98. The default is C:\Windows. If you'd like to install it to a different directory, you would click Other Directory and then click Next. And then we can type in the drive letter as well as the full path of where you'd like to place the Windows 98 files. So for example, if you wanted to go ahead and put this on your D drive, you could type in D:\, and then type in a directory name, for example, Win98 or Windows, and then it would then be, Windows 98 would then be installed in this directory. You still have to have a bootable C drive, however, with a little bit of room, because Windows 98 will go ahead and put files on your C drive, even if you're installing to a different drive letter on your local machine. I'm going to go ahead and click Back to go back one window. I'm going to select the default of C:\Windows. You'll notice over on the left-hand side of the screen, we can see a column with different steps. One of the major differences between the Windows 95 setup program and Windows 98 is that there are less steps involved. We can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps to install Windows 98, where there used to be 12 steps for installing Windows 95. We can see the estimated time remaining down below the steps of 46 minutes, and we get some information down below that telling us we can install Windows 98 in a folder other than the default of C:\Windows. Once we've selected the directory that we'd like to go ahead and install Windows 98 into, we can click Next in the lower right-hand bottom of the window. And now it's preparing the directory, and we'll make sure the setup program will make sure that we have enough space on our hard drive to install Windows 98. And again, here it's checking for available disk space after it checked for installed components. And after that's done, we can go ahead and continue on with our setup. And now we have different setup options. We have to select the type of setup that we'd like for this installation. The default is typical. We can select from typical, portable, compact to save disk space, or what I like to do is always select custom, which this puts me in control, and I can select the components that I want installed. So I'll go ahead and select the custom option button and then click Next. From here, we need to type in our user information. We need to enter in our name and our company name if we have a company that we're associated with. So I'll type in my name, my username, and the company. Simply type in Keystone. And now we'll go ahead and click Next. Here we can select from the components that we'd like installed for Windows 98. If we simply want to accept the defaults, we can leave all these alone, and we can simply click Next. However, if we'd like to select the different components, we can do this very easily. Notice the first option here under Components is Accessibility. If you're performing a full installation of Windows 98 from MS-DOS, you'll get the Select Components window. If you're performing just an upgrade from Windows 95, you won't get the Select Components window. It'll just go ahead and select the components you already had installed for your Windows 95 computer. You can go ahead and select which components you want, or you can just select the default by clicking Next to continue. So here we can see the different components that are already selected for us by default by the Windows 98 Setup Wizard. We can see we have accessibility, accessories, communications, desktop themes, and so on. Now you'll notice some of these have a check mark, but they have a gray background. Some of these have no check mark at all. If I were to go ahead and select, for example, desktop themes and click in the checkbox, notice I've now gone ahead and I have a check mark with a white background. If you come over to the right-hand side of the window, under description, it says I've selected 17 of 17 components. Now, for these other ones, if I go ahead and move back up to accessories, for example, if we look over on the right-hand side of the window, it tells us that the setup wizard has selected 6 of 12 components. Well, let's say we'd like to go ahead and take a look at the details of what has been selected. We can click the Details button. From here, we can see which subcomponents that make up accessories have been selected for us by default. If we'd like to deselect a component, we can simply click on its checkbox. To select it, we can simply click on the checkbox and we can see the check mark appears. So simply clicking and unclicking to select or deselect each component. So for each one that we want to go ahead and include, we need to make sure that there's a check mark in its associated checkbox. So I've selected some options here, and now I'll go ahead and click OK. And we can see we now have 8 of 12 components selected rather than 6. And we still have a gray background on the check mark because not all of the components have been selected. Now, if we'd like a quicker way to select all components, I'm going to hit my down arrow and come down and highlight communications. Over on the right, it tells us we have 3 of 8 components selected. I could click details, and if I wanted all of these, I could go through and click each one, but it's kind of a pain in the neck to do that. An easier way is to come down and click cancel. If you're sure that you want all of the components, you can go ahead and just leave it highlighted like this. Instead of using your mouse, use the space bar on your keyboard. Hit it once, and notice you deselect all of the communications components. If you hit your space bar again, you'll select all of them. You won't have to go through and get them one by one. Notice 8 of 8 components are selected. If I click the details button for the communications component, we can see that indeed all of these are certainly selected. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And let's do this one more time. For example, for Internet Tools, notice it says just 2 of 7 components are selected. If I want to be sure and select all of them, with Internet Tools highlighted here in blue, we can see it's highlighted. Hit my space bar, it becomes unselected. Hit my space bar again, and all the components become selected. Once we've selected all the components that we want here for Windows 98, we can simply go ahead and click Next. And now we get the identification window. We need to type in a unique computer name, and if we're on a network, it definitely needs to be a unique name on our network. It needs to be 15 characters or less, alphanumeric, with no spaces. For example, if I wanted to make this Dan50, I can do that, and that's a legal name. Again, alphanumeric, 15 characters or less, no spaces. For a work group, if I'm going to go ahead and be on a network, I can type in my network work group name. And for computer description, I can go ahead and type in anything for my description of this computer, and that can have spaces, of course. Once we're done working with the identification window, we can click Next. From here, we can take a look at our computer settings. We can see our keyboard layout, United States 101, as well as our regional settings, English, United States. If we'd like to change any of these settings, we can simply click the Change button, and then we'll be allowed to make changes. I'm going to go ahead and keep the default, and then click Next. Now we can establish our location, and notice because we are in the United States, we're defaulting to US. If we have a different version, a localized version of Windows 98, then it would probably select the different region or location for your particular area. I'll leave it at US and click Next. And now we need to go ahead and create a startup disk. If we have any trouble starting Windows 98 or Windows 98 setup, we can use the startup disk to start our computer to run from the floppy drive. I'll go ahead and click Next. And now we need to be sure to insert a 3.5-inch floppy disk, and the files will be copied over to it. Once you've inserted your Windows 98 startup disk into drive A, basically just a blank diskette, click OK. And Windows 98 Setup Wizard will go out and create the startup disk. And we can see that the files, all the files have almost been copied to the startup diskette. And in a moment, we'll get a dialog box telling us that the diskette has been successfully completed. So we get a message box now that setup has finished creating the startup disk. We should remove it from the A drive and then go ahead and click OK to continue. After you've created your emergency startup disk for Windows 98, the setup program will then go out and start copying all of the files from the CD-ROM over to your hard drive. To start copying the Windows 98 files from the CD-ROM, click Next, and the file copy process will begin along with banners telling you information about the new Microsoft Windows 98 program. We can see the file copy progress bar down in the lower left-hand corner of the window, and files are now being copied to our computer. So the nice thing to know about using Windows 98 setup and going ahead and trying to install the program, if you have a problem during setup, for example, if the electricity goes off, or if someone, one of your kids come up and hits the reset button and restarts the computer in the middle of copying files, there is a safe recovery. Let's take a look and see safe recovery in action. So for whatever reason, again, the electricity going out or what have you, my system went down, it rebooted in the middle of running setup, and so now I've gone ahead and I've rerun setup. I typed setup and hit enter from MS-DOS, or you could rerun this from Windows 3X or Windows 95. If you're performing an upgrade, it wouldn't matter. You'd get the same window here, the safe recovery window. Setup is telling us that it encountered a problem or did not complete a previous installation. What we should do is select Safe Recovery Mode, which is recommended, and then it'll go ahead and try to complete the installation using the Safe Recovery feature. So with Use Safe Recovery selected, I'll go ahead and click Next, and we'll go ahead and try to reinstall Windows 98 from where we left off. I'll click to accept the license agreement, and then click Next. Enter in my product key, and then click Next again. And now the 98 Setup Wizard will go out and check our system. Make sure there are no hard drive problems from that reboot that we accidentally had. And then it'll check for installed components as well as for available disk space once again, just as we did previously. Now we can select our setup options once again, either typical, portable, compact, or custom. And as I said, I like to choose custom, so I'm in control and I can choose which options get installed for my Windows 98 system. I'll select custom and click next. And I need to enter in my username and my company name. I'll go ahead and type that in. And we'll click next again. Now we have to go ahead and select whatever components that we'd like to install under Windows 98. And once we've selected the different components, we can go ahead and click Next. And we need to enter in identification information. Again, we have to enter in a computer name as well as a workgroup name if we're on a network. And I'll go ahead and leave it at Keystone if that's the name of my workgroup. And we can type in an optional computer description. Now I'll go ahead and click Next again. And we'll take a look at different computer settings. And I'll leave it at the default, US 101 for the keyboard layout, and English United States for the regional settings. And I'll go ahead and click Next again. As far as our location, since we happen to be in the United States, we'll go ahead and leave it at the United States. You should select the location that you happen to be in, and we'll click Next. And now we'll go ahead and create a startup disk once again. Be sure to insert a blank formatted floppy disk into your A drive, and then click Next. And setup will go out and copy the files to the startup disk. Go ahead and click OK once we've put the disk into the drive, and files will now be copied. And we can see that we're almost done with copying the files to our Windows 98 startup disk. We'll get a pop-up message box telling us that the copy was completed in a moment. And we can go ahead and to remove the disk out of the drive, and we'll click OK to continue with our setup. And now we can go ahead and click Start to have the Windows 98 files copied from the CD-ROM over to our hard drive. And I'll click Next to do that. And we can see we get a banner with information regarding upgrading or installing Windows 98. We can see how much time is remaining for this installation over here on the left. And we get information about what's going on right now. We can see Setup is preparing to copy new system files to our computer. And now we can see, again, our file copy progress. We have our progress bar in the lower left-hand corner. And we get more banners that pop up as the file copy progress continues, again, telling us information about this new product, Windows 98 from Microsoft. And we can see by our file copy progress bar, we're almost done with the file copy process. And Microsoft says thank you, and please register your copy of Windows 98. And we're at 99% and counting. We're now at 100%. File copy process is complete. And now, Setup needs to restart our computer. It will restart by itself in 15 seconds, or we can go ahead and expedite this by clicking the Restart Now button, which I'll do. And the computer will reboot. And now we're getting ready to run Windows 98 for the very first time. We get the logo screen here right after Setup has completed the file copy process. And there'll be a few more last-minute questions will be asked, certain settings that Windows 98 needs to know about before we're ready to actually go ahead and use Windows 98. And now we can see the final step, step 5, is setting up hardware and finalizing settings. Windows 98 is now initializing its driver database. And according to the estimated time remaining, we have 18 minutes left here in the setup program. Windows 98 is now setting up any plug-and-play devices that we might have installed on this particular machine. Now, at this particular point, if your computer seems to not respond for a long period of time, turn off the power, then wait about 10 seconds, and then turn it back on. Right now we have hardware detection going on. Windows 98 is detecting any non-plug-and-play hardware devices in our computer. This could take a few minutes. It could cause the computer to stop responding. Again, if the computer does stop responding for a long period of time, simply turn the power off. Don't just press reset. And then wait about 10 seconds for the hard drives to power down. Start it up again, and it should go ahead and start again from where it left off. We can see the hardware detection phase is almost complete here at 95%. And now Windows 98 is setting up our hardware and any plug-and-play devices we may have. Once again, Setup needs to restart our computer after this particular phase, and we could either click Restart Now, or as we can see by the progress bar, in 15 seconds, it will go ahead and restart automatically. And there it goes. Back after the second reboot now, and again, 98 is setting up our hardware and any plug-and-play devices we may have installed in this particular computer. Notice we only have 11 minutes remaining now in the setup process, so we're almost done. And now we can see Windows 98 is setting up the following items. We can see our date-time properties. If I move this window down a bit, we can show you Windows 98 will have to go ahead and set up our time zone, control panel, programs on the start menu, Windows help, DOS program settings, tuning up application start, and system configuration. Looking at our date time properties, we need to select our time zone. It's defaulting here to Pacific time, right? We happen to be in Mountain Time here in Utah. So I'll select Mountain Time, and we can choose to have Windows 98 automatically adjust the clock for daylight savings time changes or not, and I'll go ahead and say yes. They follow daylight savings time here in Utah. We'll keep that box checked. I'll click on date and time, and from here we can go ahead and set the proper month, the proper year, as well as clicking on the proper day of the week. Over on the right-hand side of the window, we can go ahead and set up the proper time if it's not correct already. And once we've done this, we can simply go ahead and click Close, and Windows 98 will move on and set up these other components to finalize the installation. Setting up shortcut menu shortcuts, setting up start menu shortcuts, now it's setting up Windows 98 Help, going through and updating all of these system settings. And we can see that it's almost done updating our system settings, and it's going to go ahead and restart automatically in 15 seconds, or else we can speed it up and click Restart Now. And now we're actually going to be running Windows 98, and we'll get to use it for the very first time. Now we get the Windows 98 Microsoft Networking dialog. We can log on to Windows 98. And all we need to do is type in our username. Usually we wouldn't have spaces. I'll say Dan B. And type in my password. And I'll click OK to log on to Windows 98. We get a Windows password confirmation dialog asking us to confirm our new password. So we'll type it once again under the Confirm New Password field, and we'll click OK again. And now Windows 98 is building a driver information database because it found some new hardware connected to our computer. And you may or may not get this particular dialog box popping up on your screen. It found a monitor, and it doesn't know the type. But it's going ahead and installing software so we can use this monitor, a generic driver. And it found a printer connected to our system, HP LaserJet 6P. And it's going to go ahead and pull the files off the Windows 98 CD-ROM that fortunately is still in the CD-ROM drive. So it goes ahead and conveniently pulls the files off of there. And once these drivers have been loaded, we'll then be able to use our system. Again, it's updating system settings. And with that music, we can tell that we're just about ready to use Windows 98. Right now, it's setting up settings for Internet Explorer 4, working with fonts, setting up the Windows desktop, and working with system policies, multimedia, and a whole bunch of other items we can see it's personalizing up here on this message box. And now we can see our Windows 98 desktop. We can see the channel bar over here on the right. And we got our welcome window along with our welcome music welcoming us to Windows 98. And we can go ahead and register now, connect to the internet. We can discover more information about Windows 98, including an overview, or we can maintain our computer. If you'd like to see this screen every time that Windows 98 starts, we can leave this box checked in the lower left-hand corner, or we can uncheck this box, and then this screen will not show up every time that Windows 98 starts. If we want to go ahead and begin a tour, we can click the Begin button over on the right, or we can close down this window, coming up to the upper right-hand corner and clicking on the X. And here we are at our Windows 98 desktop, ready to work. You've just seen how to perform an installation of Windows 98 on a single standalone personal computer. We took a look at hardware and software requirements, and we looked at some of the improvements of Windows 98 over Windows 95. We took a look at a pre-installation checklist, and we showed you how to upgrade from a Windows 3.x computer. We also took a look at some of the command line options for the setup program, typing setup /? on the command line. Finally, we did a full installation from Microsoft DOS, and we took a look at the safe recovery feature, and finally, we saw a successful completion of Windows 98. In our second section on this Windows 98 installation video, we'll take a look at performing an automated and customized installation over the network. We'll take a look at some more Windows 98 installation considerations, and we'll show you how to set up a shared network folder for your Windows 98 install. We'll show you the Windows 98 resource kit and the Microsoft Batch 98 program. Then we'll take a look at how to create and modify installation scripts. We'll also see how we can generate multiple script files for installing to multiple computers. We'll see how we can further customize those scripts by using the dbset utility, and we'll take a look at adding INF files using the INF installer. Finally, we'll see how to perform an automated installation over the network using an installation script. Windows 98 can be installed over the following operating systems: Microsoft DOS 5.0 or a more recent version, Microsoft Windows 3.1x or Windows for Workgroups 3.1x, or Windows 95. As far as dual boot capability, you can dual boot Windows 98 with Microsoft DOS 5.0 or later, with Windows 3.1x or Windows for Workgroups 3.1x, or with Windows NT. However, dual booting between Windows 95 and Windows 98 is not supported by Microsoft. Windows 98 naming conventions. Names for network computers must be unique if you're on a network. You're limited to a 15-character alphanumeric name with no spaces for the computer name. Also, you're allowed certain special characters, such as you see here, the exclamation mark, the @ sign, number sign, dollar sign, percent sign, the caret, the ampersand, the parentheses, both left and right, minus sign, underscore, single quote, both curly braces, a period, as well as a tilde sign. Workgroup names for networking follow the same guidelines as we've just gone over for network names or for computer names. You can definitely dual boot with Windows NT 4.0. However, you're going to want to be sure to use the DOS-style FAT16 file system because only that file system can be shared by both operating systems. Windows NT 4 cannot read or write FAT32 drive volumes, and FAT32 was introduced with Windows 95, OSR2, and Windows 98. And Windows 98 cannot read or write NTFS drive volumes. So you need to be very careful if you are dual booting between Windows 98 and Windows NT. As far as running the setup program for Windows 98, be sure that no application programs are running when you run the setup program. Disable any antivirus programs that may be running, and also be sure to disable any antivirus checking done in the system BIOS, and you do that via the CMOS when the system first boots up. Some improvements in the Windows 98 setup program. There are only 5 steps now instead of 12 for Windows 95. All the user input is requested at the beginning of the setup program, so it can go ahead and run uninterrupted after all the input has been entered. The enumeration of plug-and-play devices is performed before the hardware detection phase, and this allows for less likely possibility that the system will lock up. Also, restarts during the setup process are automatic after 15 seconds, meaning that there's no user input required, and it can run much more in a more unattended fashion. Some of the big differences between Windows 98 and Windows 95, there no longer is a net setup program. If you simply drag and drop the files from the CD to a network SharePoint, as we'll see in a moment. There's a new Microsoft Batch 98 utility, and this writes setup scripts to automate the installation. Generally speaking, if you have to install more than 5 computers or more than 5 workstations, you probably want to consider using Microsoft Batch 98. There's the INF installer tool to allow you to install third-party drivers so they can be installed automatically during setup after you script it. There's dbset that you can use to customize scripts. Remote boot PCs are no longer supported under Windows 98, as well as shared installations, server-based installations, are no longer supported either. Since Windows 98 no longer has the Windows 95 Net Setup program, if you want to copy files over to a network installation SharePoint, you simply have to drag and drop them over. We're looking at the Windows 98 introduction window. If you use auto run and put the CD in the drive, you'll go ahead and take a look at this. I'm going to select Browse this CD by clicking on it. We can browse the contents of the CD-ROM. Here we can see the contents. And what we're interested in is this folder right here entitled Win98. This contains all of the necessary setup files to install Windows 98 onto different computers. What we can do is simply drag and drop this folder over to our network drive. I'm going to bring up a network drive down here, my S drive, and I'll move the window a little bit up and out of the way. I'll simply right-click and drag from the Windows 98 CD over to my S drive, my network drive, let go, and I'll select Copy here. And all the files will be copied from the CD-ROM over to my network installation, SharePoint. If you're going to deploy a lot of Windows 98 workstations within your organization, you're going to want to go ahead and create script files to help you automate and customize your installations. To this end, you want to go ahead and become very familiar with the Windows 98 Resource Kit and the Microsoft Batch 98 utility. So here we can see the copy is now complete. We went ahead and by using drag and drop, we copied all the Windows 98. Copied the Windows 98 folder off the CD-ROM over to our network drive, happens to be our S drive. If I click it, we can see all the contents of the Windows 98 folder with all the different folders and files that allow you to install Windows 98. Now, if you're going to be doing any kind of serious deployment of Win98, you're going to want to get real familiar, as I said earlier, with the Windows 98 Resource Kit, and it's going to pop up here in a moment. I have auto run enabled here on Windows 98, and we can see here's the Windows 98 Resource Kit intro window, and we can install the kit, look at release notes, and do a bunch of other things with it. You're going to want to go ahead and install the Resource Kit so you can work with the various utilities. One of the many useful utilities that you can find on the Windows 98 Resource Kit is the Microsoft Batch 98 program. This will allow you to create installation scripts to help you customize and automate your Windows 98 installations. You can also find Microsoft Batch 98 on the Windows 98 CD. You don't have to have the Resource Kit, but the Resource Kit has a bunch of other utilities that are very useful as well. Let's see where we can find Batch 98, not using the Resource Kit, but on the Windows 98 CD. Back here at the Windows 98 CD, we're looking at the root directory here of the CD-ROM drive, happens to be my D drive. We need to go into the folder called Tools. From there, we need to go into the folder called Res Kit, and this is not the full-blown Resource Kit. These are just some of the tools to kind of whet your appetite for the full-blown Resource Kit. We need to enter in, go ahead and click on Res Kit, and then we have a folder called Batch. I'll go ahead and click on Batch, take a look at its contents. So it's Tools, Res Kit, Batch, and from here we can see the Batch program, and there should be a setup file, and we can see it right here, which will allow us to install Microsoft Batch 98 on this computer. So I'll go ahead and click Setup, and I'll launch the setup program for Microsoft Batch 98. And here we get the welcome window, so we'll click OK. And we'll go ahead and accept the default directory for Microsoft Batch 98. Now, if you install the Resource Kit for Windows 98, Microsoft Batch 98 is installed automatically for you. But if you don't have the Resource Kit, you're going to want to go ahead and install it this way. I'll simply click this button to begin the installation, and the files will be copied over to my hard drive. And now we can see we get a message box telling us that Microsoft Batch 98 was completed successfully. Go ahead and click OK, and we're back to our desktop. Once you've installed Microsoft Batch 98, you're ready to go ahead and start generating script files. Let's see how we can go ahead and generate these script files. On the Windows 98 CD, you can see a generic script file, and the default name is msbatch.inf. This is on the Windows, as I said, on the Windows 98 CD-ROM, and we're looking here in our network SharePoint where I copied the files. If I click it once, it'll go ahead and run the program up in Notepad. We can see this is msbatch.inf. That's the default name for a script file for a Windows 98 installation. And we can just get some generic information, the version number, and the fact that it's using 32-bit msbatch, the save date, and things like this. This is a very, very generic and very, very short script file. It's the generic script file that runs whenever you run setup for Windows 98. I'm going to go ahead and close it down, and I'll minimize this window. Let's go ahead, now that we've installed MS Batch 98, let's run it. Go down to the Start menu, click Start, go up to Programs, and we can see Microsoft Batch 98 listed at the bottom here. We'll click it to run it, and we'll take a look here at the Windows 98, Microsoft Batch 98 program. Fortunately, Microsoft Batch 98 is fairly well documented. If we come over to the Help menu and select Contents, we can see there's a whole lot of information that we can get on working with Microsoft Batch 98. So the help system is pretty well done. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of help for now by clicking the Close button. Back at Batch 98, we can see under System Settings there are several different settings that we can select. Each one of these buttons has many, many different options. For example, under General Setup Options, we have several different tabs, including Install Information, User Info, Setup Prompts, Regional Settings, etc., that we can go ahead and customize to meet our needs. I'll go ahead and click Cancel for now. As well as under Network Options, there's several different network options that we can go ahead and specify to customize a brand new script file. One easy thing you can do now with Batch 98 is to click the Gather Now button. The easiest way is to create a computer as a model or a reference computer, and you can use that to install your other computers by taking the different settings, gathering them, and putting them into a script file. If I click Gather Now, then Windows 98 or Batch 98 goes out and gathers all the information for all the settings that were stored when we installed Windows 98 on this computer. To see what it does, and notice status now says complete, we can take a look at each of these different options. So now let's take a look and click on General Setup Options, now that we've gathered all of our settings into this file. And now we can see we have our product ID already filled in for us, as well as our installation directory. Now, if we'd like to make any changes here, if we want to use a different directory, for example, /Win98, we can simply fill that in. Notice we have an option here to not show the installation directory warning. I'll leave that marked as it is. And for uninstall options, we can choose to not create uninstall information or to automatically create it. I'll go ahead and leave that at where it is. Under user information, we can go ahead and type in a username. So for example, we could say, we're going to roll out a lot of machines, Keystone user. We can type in the company. Now for the computer name, we'll see how we can further customize this in a moment. Obviously for each PC, it needs to have a unique name on the network. So I'll just leave it at Dan50 for now, and we'll have to change it later on, and we'll see how we can do that. The workgroup name, we'll go ahead and enter in a workgroup, and if Keystone is correct, we can leave that. For a description, we might want to change that, and again, I'll simply highlight Keystone user, Control-C on my keyboard to copy it, and Control-V to paste it in under description. Going up to the Setup Prompts tab, we can go ahead and select which user prompts are shown during user setup. Notice we can have automatic acceptance of the end user license agreement, and if we're going to do this unattended, we want that. Don't prompt for the emergency start disk. We don't need user intervention for that. Automatically reboot PCI and PNP machines during setup. That's fine. And don't search the source folder for new devices. And you can skip the PC card wizard. If you're not using mobile computers, you can go ahead and select that. For unattended installation, it tells us check all boxes. So we're going to make this an unattended installation, and we'll check all of these. For regional settings, we can select our time zone, and I'll go ahead and leave it at Mountain Time. And for international settings, we can change our keyboard layout as well as our regional settings, and I'll leave these at their defaults. Coming up to desktop, in the upper left-hand corner, we can select which desktop icons are going to be installed on the machine, and I'll leave these all at their defaults. And the miscellaneous, we can delete online service from the desktop after setup. If we want that, we can select that, and we can choose to not show the Windows 98 welcome window when it first starts up. We can also choose to not show the registration wizard. Under the Printers tab, we can install the following printers during setup. We could type those in here if we wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and leave these blank for the moment. Under most recently used locations, we could go ahead and enter in the most recently used path in the box below, and then they'll be added to the list so that the user could quickly locate files during the setup process for various components. Finally, under user profiles, we can go ahead and say that all users of the workstations will use the same preferences and settings, or we can say that users can customize their preferences, and we can go ahead and say include desktop icons and network neighborhood contents in the user settings, and or to include start menu and program groups in user settings. And I'll say just include the desktop icons and network neighborhood content. So we're going to set up user profiles here when we perform the unattended install of Windows 98. Once we're done with the general setup options, we can click OK to accept those changes, and then we can move on to the network options. From here, we can go ahead and select the available protocols, IPX, SPX, NetBEUI, as well as Microsoft 32-bit DLC. And on this machine, we've set it up with TCP/IP. If I click TCP/IP settings, I can go ahead and choose whether to enable or disable the domain name system service. If I want to go ahead and enter in the name of the default gateway, any WINS configuration information I'd like to enter in, as well as how the machines will obtain an IP address. We have a hard-coded IP address right here. Obviously, that's only good for one individual unique machine. I'll say we're going to use DHCP, so obtain an address automatically. I'll go ahead and click OK. And now let's keep working with the network options. Let's come up to the Services tab. And we can say that we want it to include file and printer sharing for Microsoft Networks. And we can say whether we want LM announce and whether we want browse master options enabled, disabled, or automatic. We might want to leave it at disabled for workstations on a Windows NT network, for example. File and printer sharing for networks, if we enable this setting, we can go ahead and make any changes here. But I'll put this back to file and printer sharing for Microsoft Networks with the browse master option disabled for the clients. Clicking on the Clients tab, we can go ahead and choose to use the particular client that we're going to be working with on our network. Defaults to client from Microsoft Networks, and we can choose to log on to a particular Windows NT domain. And we can type in the name of the domain. In this case, I'll leave it at Keystone. That'll be for our own. That'll be the domain for our organization. You should type in the domain for your organization. If I click on Access Control, we can control access to resources using either share level access control, assigning passwords to each shared resource, or user level access control, obtaining a list of users from your Windows NT server or your NetWare server. And you have to type in the name of the domain or the name of the server, obviously. Server for NetWare, that is. Under Additional Clients, we can choose to have additionally supported clients such as Banyan, Vines, Novell NetWare, 3.x, and or 4.x. We could also enter in different protocols for other clients as well down here in the Other Clients section. Once we're done with our network options, we can click OK to save these settings. And now we can take a look at working with optional components by clicking this button. From here, we can take a look at the different available areas such as accessibility, accessories. We can choose which components will be installed, such as the briefcase, or games, or different mouse pointers. We can simply click on the component that we want installed on all of these PCs through the use of this script file that we are creating. We would go ahead and click on each available area like communications. We wanted to be sure to have a direct cable connection available on each computer. We'd click, for example, direct cable connection. And we have to go through each of these areas and select the different components that we want for each of these areas. We can also choose to select all by clicking select all, clear all, or we could click on restore defaults to restore the default choices. Once we're done working with optional components, we can click OK. And we're back at the Microsoft Batch 98 main window. And now we can look at Internet Explorer options. As you know, Internet Explorer 4 is integrated into Windows 98. And we can choose to have a quick launch toolbar on our taskbar with IE, Outlook Express. We can choose the show desktop icon as well as view channels. If we don't want the view channels quick launch toolbar available. We can unmark that box, and we can either enable or disable the channel bar by default, and I'll leave it disabled by unmarking this box for the channel bar. Coming up to display under Internet Explorer options, we can choose to have the active desktop, or we can use the classic desktop. I'm going to select use the active desktop. We can also browse folders by opening each folder in the same window or opening a folder in its own window. I like the default, which is happens to be open each folder in the same window. You don't have a bunch of windows cluttering up your desktop. Under the last item here for display, we can click items either by single click or by a double click, and I'll elect to do the new style by opening items with just a single click. Let's come up to the Browser tab, take a look at some of these options. We can choose a home page or a start page that'll be open whenever the browser is started, and it defaults to home.microsoft.com. We could change it, for example, to the home page for our own organization, for example, www.kls.corp.com or whatever your particular organization's home page is. You can go ahead and make that change. We can also do a post setup page. We can also have a post setup page, and this is open when the user starts the browser for the first time. We could go ahead and modify that if we wanted to as well. When the user clicks Help in the browser menu bar and then clicks Online Support, the browser will display this URL, and we can change this as well if we want to. Coming up to the Security tab, we can specify different security settings for different zones of web content. If we want to go ahead and make any changes here, we can do that now. And finally, under Proxy settings, we can choose to access the internet using a proxy server, such as Microsoft Proxy Server, and we would enter in the address of the proxy as well as the port. Normally, I believe it's port 80 that is used for the client to access the web via a proxy server. Once we're done setting these different options for the Internet Explorer, we can go ahead and click OK, and it brings us back to the Batch 98 main window. Finally, we can take a look at Advanced Options. Go ahead and click Advanced Options. We can go ahead and add different registry files if we want to. These will be added automatically during the unattended setup. We can also choose to implement a system policy file automatically, or we can go ahead and choose Manual, and we can give the exact path of where that policy file is located. I'll leave it at Automatic. If we click up on the Windows Update tab, from here, under Upgrade Options, we can choose to enable upgrade of drivers via the internet and or enable upgrade of software via the internet. We can go ahead and choose both of these, one of these, or none of these. We can also choose a default Windows Update local page or a default Windows Update remote page if we happen to have those addresses. Once we're done working with the advanced options, again, we'll click OK to save these settings, and now we're back at Microsoft Batch 98. At this point, we could choose to click the bottom button, which is called Save Settings to INF, and the default name is msbatch.inf. If we'd like to use a different name, what we can do is come up to the top of the window, come up to the File menu, select File, then we can go ahead and we can select Save As. From here, notice that the default is to save it in the Microsoft Batch 98 folder, and under the file name of msbatch.inf. I'm actually going to elect to leave it at the default because that's the standard Microsoft has set. I'll leave it at that, but I will put this in a different directory, in a different drive. I'll click my Save In drop-down. I'll select my S drive, and here's where my Win98 files are stored. Double-click on Win98. I'm going to go ahead and overwrite the generic msbatch.inf that comes with Windows 98 with my new msbatch.inf that I just created. So I'll click Save, and it asks me if I want to replace the INF that's already there, and I'll say yes. Notice that we got a message box telling us that a problem occurred while trying to write to the file. Now, two things could be going on, one of two things or both. One of which is that you may not have given yourself write permissions for that directory on the network. Another problem could be is when you copied the files from the CD-ROM, you did not take off the read-only attribute that stays with the file. So let's click OK. I'm going to go back to my Win98 folder on my S drive. And let's take a look at msbatch.inf by right-clicking it and selecting Properties. And notice that sure enough, because it came from a CD-ROM drive, all the files are still read-only. So we'll unmark the read-only checkbox for msbatch.inf, click OK, minimize this window again, and we'll go ahead and try to save it again by going File, Save As. Here in Win98, we'll call it msbatch.inf. Now I'll click Save. Yes, I want to replace the file, and now it lets me go ahead and overwrite that file. If you're going to be rolling out many different Windows 98 PCs, you're probably going to want to go ahead and generate multiple scripts, multiple installation scripts. And the Microsoft Batch 98 program allows you to do this. Let's see how we can. If we come up to the File menu here in Microsoft Batch 98, select File, and if I select New, now I've gone ahead and I've gone ahead and opened a brand new file. Notice it says Untitled here in the title bar. And if I click on General Setup Options, you can see that there is no product ID code, and much of the information we entered in is now not here because we're working with a brand new untitled file. If we want to go ahead and bring up the file that we worked with and go ahead and re-edit it, go back up to the File menu and select Open, find the location of the file and the file name, and here it is, msbatch.inf, here in my Win98 shared folder on my network. Click Open. And now we can see it now has a title, msbatch.inf. We've opened this file, click General Setup Options, and we can see all of our settings are saved the way that we left them. If we'd like to generate multiple installation script files for Win98, let's come up to the File menu. Click File, and this time we're going to select Multiple Machine Name Save. When I click Multiple Machine Name Save, I get a dialog box that tells me the different steps to complete a multiple machine name save. We need to designate a text file containing the machine names. So before we go ahead and perform this step, we need to have already created a text file containing the machine names of the different workstations. Well, I've already done this. Let me go ahead and show you this text file. I'm going to open up a folder called 98 install that I created on my computer off camera. And here's the name of the file. I named it 98 PC names, but you could call it whatever you like. It's just a simple text file. If I click on it here in my active desktop where I'm single clicking, it'll open it up in Notepad. And all this is a bunch of machine names, each one on its own line with a carriage return. And we can just see the different names. I put WKST01, 02, 03, etc. These are all my machine names, and we can have as many as we like. Actually, we can have up to 9,999. Beyond that, we'd have to go ahead and perform a separate process. But the Windows 98 batch program can go ahead and generate up to 9,999 different script files based on this text file that we're creating with the different machine names. Once we've gone ahead and created these, we can close it down. And I'll minimize this window to go back to my multiple machine name save. And now I'll click the machine name file button. From here, I need to go ahead and locate it. And this happens to be located on my local machine, on my C drive, in a folder I called 98 install. You can call it whatever you like. And it's called 98 pcnames.txt. And I'll click Open. And notice it says 10 entries were processed because I had 10 different machine names. We'll click OK. Now I need to designate the directory in which to save the files. So I'll click Destination of Save. And we could go ahead and we could select any destination. It's defaulting here to my 98 install directory, or I could go ahead and I could select my network drive, Win98, my shared directory for my Windows 98 files, and I'll then click Open, and that's been done. Now we can do the third step, which is save the files by clicking Save Files. And notice Microsoft Batch 98 tells us it's done saving 10 files to the directory s:/Win98. And that's our shared network drive for the Win98 install process. We'll click OK, and now click here when finished, Close. So the steps are very well outlined for you. So now we've gone ahead, we can see what we've done. If I come down and open up my Win98 folder, I have it open on my taskbar. You can now see that we should have a bunch of files. And we'll go ahead and find them. And what we can do is change the view to details. Make this window a little larger. And I'll go ahead and want to see the most recent files at the top by clicking the Modified button. And here we can see the BSTP 001.inf, 002.inf, etc. These are the 10 files that were generated through my multiple machine name save. That's why the reason why you can only do 9,999 is because there's only 4 digits that are allowed. The BSTP is required, and it just numbers them consecutively. If I open up one of these, we can see what a script file looks like. It says msbatch.inf, and we can see all of our parameters have been saved. Here we can see the product ID, for example, and not to show the end user license agreement. All of our settings have been saved into a text file that is rather long. We can see name and organization, the workstation name, etc. So we've customized the script for this particular workstation. We could go in and individually enter in a description and a work group name or username if we wanted to at this point, or we could just use it, we could leave it in the generic, the way we left it in the generic way. We can scroll through, and again, these are all the parameters that we will use when we install this workstation using this particular script. Once we're done looking at the script, we can simply close it down, and we're back looking at our Windows 98 folder. If you need to customize your setup files even further, even more than using a multiple machine name save with Microsoft Batch 98, there's another utility that you can find in the resource kit, and there's documentation on it in the resource kit, called dbset. Let's take a look at further customizing installation scripts using the dbset utility. First, I'm going to close down the Microsoft Batch 98 program by clicking the upper right-hand corner. And now let's go down to the Start menu, click Start, and since I've already installed the resource kit for Windows 98 on this computer, I'm going to go up to Programs, and I'm going to go down to Windows 98 Resource Kit, and I'm going to use the very helpful Resource Kit Tools help file. This gives us information on all the tools that ship with the Windows 98 Resource Kit. I'm going to come over to my alphabetic list of tools, and I'll click on the letter D, and here we can see dbset, the bulk configuration utility, and I'll click on it. We can get information on dbset. And it tells us it's a utility to individualize the setup scripts and other types of files. And it reads information out of a data file and then customizes the msbatch.inf file, or whatever you named the particular script file. And we can take a look, for example, at the dbset syntax as well as the dbset example. If I click on dbset example, we get an example now, assuming a particular type of database, and a default template file with these different variables for user, machine name, IP, and server. And we can go ahead and take a look at an example. We can also go back. If we click on the link called Using dbset with MSBatch, we get an actual sample msbatch.inf file. And if we wanted to, we could copy and paste this, and we could go ahead and use Notepad and paste this in, and use this as our sample template file. So that's essentially what I've done. I've highlighted this sample script file here in the Windows 98 Resource Kit under dbset, and I've copied and pasted it into Notepad. I'm going to go ahead and close this down for now, and let's bring up another folder I have open on my taskbar called C:\98 install /test. You can call it whatever you like. Notice I have 3 files. One is my database file. The other one is a script that I created called msbatch.inf. And the third one is my template file. If I click on template.txt, which is the default name for the dbset utility as a default template, we can see I've gone ahead. I have essentially a script file that's just named template.txt, and I have variables here for some of the information that will be filled in later. For example, computer name is %, computer name %. Work group is %, work group %. Variables are always enclosed within the % signs, and that designates a variable using dbset. And there's probably one more. You can see login domain equals % domain %, and they're enclosed in quotes as well. So this is where you go ahead, wherever you want variables, put in variables. Everything else is hard-coded, and that will remain as part of the script. This is just a template file that will help generate the script. I'm going to close this down. Now let's take a look at our database file called dbset.db. It's just a text file. If I click on it, I have Notepad already configured to open up this type of file. The first line has the different columns that you're going to be using. So we have computer name, work group, and domain. These are the columns, and here we can see what gets filled in. Here's our database. I only have 3 entries. We could have more. We have Alexis B, sales, sales 07, sales, Sonia G, and we have Ciara Z. The default delimiter is a comma. Otherwise, you'd have to go ahead and specify the delimiter. So we have our column headings on the first line, and then we have the data on each additional line. We have computer name. First one is computer name. Second one, work group. And in this case, third one is the name of the domain. So here's our dbset database file. And again, using the name dbset.db, which is the default. And I'll close this down. Now to use dbset, we have to use it from the command line. So I'll go ahead and open up a command prompt. I start programs ms-dos prompt. And now we can go ahead and we can see our DOS prompt window. If you want to take a look at the different command line switches for dbset, use the Windows 98 resource kit, and or you can type dbset /? on the command line, and you'll get a list of the different commands, and there are many, that you can use with the dbset program. I'm going to go ahead and clear this out. We need to go into the directory where these files are stored, the database file and the template file. So I'm going to type cd /98 install /test, and now we can go ahead and we see those files are located in there. A dbset should be in my path because I installed the resource kit on this machine. If we go ahead and open up the dbset file, we can see the different names that we created here in our dbset database. And now we can see both the names and we can see our window. So what we can type in, if we're using the different defaults, we can simply type dbset and then a space. And then we can type in / and the letter R, and that means you want to write this to a file. You need the / R. And then you can type into a space, type in the name of the file. And the default is msbatch.inf. We could call this msbatch2.inf to distinguish it and give it a slightly different name. That's the name of the file it's going to write to. We can go ahead and hit our space bar. If we're using a template file with a different name other than template.txt, we could do a /I and type in the name of the template file. For example, template.inf. But if we are using template.txt, we don't need to specify it. Finally, the last thing we need to specify, if we look up here in our database, we can see we have different names. The default is that the first column, whatever the variable is in the first column, that's what it will look at by default. Otherwise, we'd have to specify which particular variable we're looking at. For example, if we wanted to specify by work group or by domain. But if we wanted to specify, in this case, by computer name, that's the first column, and the first column is what dbset looks at automatically by default. So let's come back down, and in our list of names, let's select the name of Sonia G. You have to spell it correctly. And so it'll look in the database in the first column, look for the name Sonia G. If it finds it, it'll write the parameters that we've entered in for the work group and the domain into a file named msbatch2.inf. So let's go ahead now, after entering this in, hit our Enter key, and notice that we get no prompt, we get no information. That's a good sign. That means it worked. If you get any other information up on the screen, that means it didn't work. Let's go ahead and take a look back in our GUI, and let's see, look at it right here. It created msbatch2.inf, just like it was supposed to. So we did something right. Let's click on it to open it up, and let's see exactly what it did. It should have replaced anywhere there was a variable with the information for Sonia G. Computer name, Sonia G. If we go back, look at our database, we can see right here, Sonia G, that's the name, and the work group name, the corresponding work group name should be MGMT11, and we can see the work group name is MGMT11, and we can see that also, for Sonia G, the domain should be exec. So let's scroll down and see what the domain is. And we can see the logon domain is indeed exec. So this is a way to individualize and further customize installation scripts under Windows 98. If you need to install custom drivers, like custom network drivers or video drivers or sound drivers that came out after Windows 98 was released, you can do this by using the INF installer. Let's see. To install custom driver files for your automated setup, what you can do is come down to the Start menu. You need to have the Windows 98 Resource Kit for this. Go over to Programs, go down to Windows 98 Resource Kit, and this time let's select the Tools Management Console. This makes use of the new Microsoft Management Console. We'll click Close for Tip of the Day. Here we see our Windows 98 Resource Kit, and we have Tools A to Z. I double click on Tools A to Z. I'm interested in now in the INF installer. Under F to J we should find it, double click that. And here we see the INF installer utility. This allows us to add new software components. If I double click it, I'll launch it right from here. And here we get the INF installer window. The INF installer window is pretty simple. You need to simply select the location of the INF to add to your Windows 98 setup, for example, your A drive or wherever it happened to be located, in the top section. And in the lower section, you simply need to specify the location of your Windows 98 setup files. It defaults here to the C:\/ directory, the root of the C. We can simply click Browse, go out on our network, select the S drive, Win98, and we can see it's right here. Go ahead and click Open. And now we can go ahead and add the INF file by simply clicking Add INF. I don't have an INF file to add, but if I did, again, I simply click this button. It'll be added, and then for subsequent installations over the network, these special drivers will then be added, or the special driver one. I could have several of them if I wanted to. Once we're done using the INF installer, we can click Exit. I can close down the Microsoft Management Console by clicking Console and then Exit, and I'll say yes to save my settings for my Windows 98 Tools Management Console window. And I'm back looking at my test folder. So after you've gone ahead and run the Microsoft Batch 98 program, you've generated a setup script, you've gone ahead and maybe manually modified it, individualized it, perhaps you've used dbset to customize it some more. Finally, you're ready to go ahead and use that script to perform an over-the-network unattended installation. Let's see how we can do this. The first thing you're going to want to do is to make sure that your script file, or at least the script file that you're going to use, is in the same directory as your Windows 98 setup files. So what I'm going to do is right-click on this msbatch2.inf. This is the one I want to use. Select Copy, bring up my Win98 network folder here in my S drive, right-click, and I'll select Paste to paste it in. And now the file's been pasted in my shared network folder. Now what we can go ahead and do is we can run setup. What I can do is simply click Start, or I can run from the command line if I want to, but I don't have to. I can click Start and then Run. And what I can do is come up and find my setup.exe file. Here it is. And I'll go ahead and click and drag down to the Run box. And we have the full path, s:\win98 \setup.exe. Now we can go ahead and enter in some switches. For example, on page 60 of the Windows 98 Resource Kit, you get a whole bunch of switches that you can use. For example, we can say /IW. What that will do is that will let setup run without displaying the license agreement. You can do space /IV. And what this will do, this will go ahead and not display any billboards when the setup program runs. Now I'm just showing you some examples. There are many, many switches, obviously. We can do space /IE. What this will do, this will skip the startup disk screen. So if you want to go ahead and you don't want your users to create a startup disk, this is the only way that you really can avoid that. by putting in a /IE. Another switch we can enter in is /IS. What this will do, this will not have us run scan disk. So right now I've got setup.exe, /IW, /IV, /IE, and /IS. Finally, I need a space, and then I need to enter in the name and path, if it's not in my current path, of my setup, of my script, my installation script file. And that happens to be, as you remember, msbatch2.inf. The full command line filled out for the setup to run the script and with all your switches. Let's go ahead and click OK to run setup using the installation script file. And first thing you'll notice is that setup is running without running scan disk. That's something that we specified on the command line, the /IS, and it's going ahead and preparing the setup wizard. Now I'm using the setup file that I actually modified off camera. I went ahead and entered in a product code, so it should not stop and ask us for a product key. It should already be filled in. And we can see the product code is automatically entered in, and it's now checking our system, and we're having no user intervention whatsoever. The script is totally running the way it should in an unattended fashion. And now the file copy process is continuing on, and again, we're getting no banners because we specified that on the command line, and our unattended setup is running quite well. You've just seen how to perform an unattended installation of Windows 98 using script files from the MS Batch utility. We took a look at some more Windows 98 installation considerations, and we showed you the Windows 98 Resource Kit. We also showed you the dbset utility for further customizing installation scripts. On this video, we also showed you how to go ahead and perform a standalone installation of Windows 98. For Keystone Learning Systems, I'm Dan Balter, saying thanks for watching and have fun working and networking with Windows 98.
We hope you've enjoyed this training session and, more importantly, increased your knowledge and productivity. Keystone Learning Systems offers hundreds of courses including MS Office, Novell Perfect Office, NetWare, Lotus Smart Suite, Lotus Notes, Power Builder, Corel Draw, PageMaker, and many, many more. Each is designed to accelerate your learning curve and increase your productivity. Each makes a nice addition to your computer training library. Call us today if you have any additional questions or would like to place an order. Our phone number in the United States and Canada is 1-800-748-4838. And if you're calling from somewhere else in the world, please dial 801-375-8680. Thank you.